It started with footprints. They came out of the woods and led straight to the door of a farmhouse. A long, single path. Clean, deep impressions in the snow. But there were no footprints going back. Whoever it was walked in and stayed. The family inside didn't call for help. No one reported anything strange. The house remained quiet. From the outside, it looked as though everything was fine. The dog barked occasionally, the cows were milked, a chimney let out smoke. But inside the house, 6 people were dead. Some of them were left where they fell. Others were hidden, stacked together in the barn and covered with straw. Whoever did it didn't leave in a hurry. They fed the animals, slept in the family's beds, cooked food in their kitchen, and waited. This was not a robbery. It wasn't an act of rage. It was something else entirely. And in the 100 years since, no one has ever been able to explain it. This happened in 1922, in the heart of Bavaria. The house sat alone between 2 small towns, too far for a scream to carry, too close for anyone to forget. The locals called it Hinterkaifeck, and what happened there remains one of the most disturbing and unsolved crimes in European history. You're not going to hear wild theories, not yet. You're going to hear what really happened, in the order it happened, slowly, quietly, and if you listen carefully, maybe you'll notice something the others missed. Keep the lights low, let the rain fall, and stay with me until the house speaks for itself. Let's begin, not with death, but with the quiet life that came before it. In 1922, the Gruber family lived on a secluded farmstead in the Bavarian countryside of Germany. It wasn't listed on any major map. You wouldn't stumble across it by accident. The farm sat between 2 tiny villages, Kaifeck and Gruber, down a narrow, muddy road called Hinterkaifeck. It wasn't a name meant to be remembered, but it would be. The house was sturdy, 2 stories, simple, functional, barn attached, as was common then. No electricity, no phone, just kerosene lanterns, wood stoves, and silence. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, was 63rd stern, harsh by all accounts. A man of few smiles. His wife Cecilia was 72nd quieter, reserved. Some say she'd learned over time to let silence be her shield. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35, had moved back after the war. Her husband had died in combat. She returned with her little girl, 7-year-old Cecilia, and later gave birth to a second child, Joseph. He was 2, but Joseph's father, no one could say for sure. And then there was the maid, Maria Baumgartner. She had just arrived, and she wouldn't live to see her second day. People in town spoke in whispers about the Grubers. Andreas was known to be difficult, proud, a man who didn't trust easily. His neighbors kept their distance. Rumors swirled about his temper, and something worse, something between him and his daughter, Victoria. In 1915, the 2 were actually arrested, accused of incest. Andreas was jailed, Victoria as well. She gave birth to Joseph while her husband was away at war. And when he never returned, that baby became the center of endless suspicion. Was he her son? Was he her brother? Or was he both? No one ever answered that. Not really. And the people in the nearby villages, they stopped asking. But the tension wasn't just inside the family. There were signs, things that didn't make sense. Weeks before the murders, Andreas mentioned finding a newspaper on the porch. It wasn't one he subscribed to. In fact, it was from a city over 70 kilometers away. No one in the household recognized it. They hadn't been into town. No visitors, no deliveries. Just the paper sitting neatly at the door. Then the keys went missing. House keys. And shortly after, footsteps in the attic. At first they thought it was wind, then mice, but it grew louder, heavier, like boots walking, pacing. Andreas searched the house, the attic, every room. He found nothing. But at night, the sounds came again. Then the maid quit. She told friends she couldn't stay there. She said the house felt wrong, not just cold, not just lonely, watched. She packed her things and left that same night. Her reason? The voices. And still, the family stayed. They kept to their routines. Chores in the morning, church on Sundays, and silence when the noises came. Andreas didn't want help. He didn't want police. He believed he could handle it. Then a new maid was hired, Maria Baumgartner. She arrived on March 31st. It was her first night on the job. It would also be her last. That evening, no one in the village saw anything strange. The family was quiet, as usual. The barn light glowed softly behind frost-covered windows. Then, night fell. No one knew it yet, but by morning, the house would fall silent for good. March 31st, 1922. It was a cold, quiet Friday in the German countryside. The sun rose over the trees, barely warming the early spring frost that clung to the roof of Hinterkaifeck, the Gruber family's isolated farmhouse, far from the nearest town, beyond the reach of any immediate help. By that evening, every person inside the house would be dead. But that morning, everything looked normal. There were 6 people living at Hinterkaifeck that day. Andreas Gruber, the 63-year-old patriarch. His wife, Cecilia, aged 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria, 35. Her daughter, young Cecilia, just 7. 2-year-old Joseph, the baby. And a maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived that very afternoon. It was her first day on the job. She had traveled from nearby Schwabhausen, brought to the house by her sister. That would be the last time her sister ever saw her alive. The Grubers had a routine, and they followed it. Morning chores were done. Bread was baked. The cows were milked. Victoria collected eggs from the hen house, as she did every day. Nothing seemed out of place. But behind those quiet rituals, there were signs that something wasn't right. They had heard footsteps in the attic for days. Their keys had gone missing, and no one could explain the newspaper found on their porch that no one subscribed to. Some say Andreas had found scratches on the lock to the tool shed, as though someone had tried to get in. Others say he saw footprints leading to the barn, but none leading back. He spoke to no one about it, not even the police. He didn't trust anyone. Maybe that was a mistake. Maria, the new maid, had gone to her room to rest early that evening. Her bed was small, just wide enough for one, with a thin wool blanket. She never had a chance to unpack fully. The family ate dinner, and sometime after nightfall, the murders began. It's believed the killer lured the first 4 victims, Andreas, Victoria, the elder Cecilia, and the child, one by one into the barn. How? No one can say for sure. Perhaps they heard a noise, a strange sound, a thud. Maybe one of the animals was disturbed. Andreas, always in control, would have gone first. In the dim barn light, with hay underfoot and cows shifting quietly in their pens, He was struck in the head with a mattock, a heavy, sharpened farm tool. He died instantly. Victoria followed. She, too, was hit in the skull, hard, clean. Then Cecilia, the elder, and finally little Cecilia. But she didn't die right away. She lived long enough to pull out tufts of her own hair, found clenched in her fists, likely from shock and pain as she lay beside her family, bleeding, breathing, and waiting in the dark. They were found later stacked on top of each other, a grotesque pile of bodies, covered in hay, as if someone wanted to hide them, but not bury them. After the barn, the killer returned to the house. There, Maria, the maid, lay in her room. She never stood a chance. One swing to the head, immediate, no sign of a struggle. Then Joseph, 2 years old, in his cot, killed while he slept. The horror should have ended there, but it didn't. Whoever committed these murders didn't run. They stayed. And that's the most chilling part of this entire story. For 4 days, the house was occupied, not by the family, by the killer. The cows were still milked each morning. The dog was fed. The fireplace was lit. Meals were taken from the pantry. Neighbors passed by the farm and assumed all was well. They saw the chimney smoking. They heard the dog bark. One neighbor even said she saw someone walking near the barn from a distance, a shadowy figure barely visible in the morning mist. But no one approached. Even more disturbing, the mailman noticed something unusual. Each day, the curtains in the windows were drawn open in the morning. Each evening, they were closed, as though someone inside was keeping up appearances. Finally, on April 4th, the silence became too much. The local repairman arrived to fix a machine and found no one answering. Victoria hadn't attended church that Sunday, highly unusual for her, and young Cecilia hadn't shown up for school. Neighbors grew suspicious. A small group gathered outside the house that evening. They knocked. No answer. They walked around the back toward the barn, and then they found it. Under loose hay were the bodies, 4 of them, stacked in the barn. It was hard to even tell them apart at first. Andreas, Victoria, Cecilia, and young Cecilia. One of the men vomited on the spot. Another sat down and refused to move. Inside the house, they found Maria and Joseph, both dead, still, cold. The police were called, but the damage was done. The crime scene had already been disturbed. Investigators came from Munich. But the investigation was sloppy. No forensics, no gloves, no photos of the scene before it was handled. In fact, the autopsies were done right there in the barn, using the family's own kitchen tools. April 5th, 1922. The farmhouse at Hinterkaifeck had become a crime scene. Inside, 6 bodies. Outside, dozens of questions. And over everything, silence. Police arrived from Munich that morning, but by then the damage had already been done. Neighbors had walked through the house, touched things, moved things. The barn, where 4 of the victims were found, had been opened, disturbed. The bodies uncovered and restacked, footprints trampled. It wasn't malicious. It was human. A small village reacting to something no one had ever seen before. But it made solving the crime almost impossible. The first problem was the weather. Snow had fallen again overnight. Whatever tracks might have been outside were gone. The only prints they could confirm were the ones from before the murders, leading to the farmhouse. Still, no prints leading away. The killer had vanished without leaving a trail. The second problem was the forensics. There were none. No crime scene tape, no gloves, no cataloging of evidence. In fact, the autopsies were done right there in the barn with the family's own kitchen knives, washed between uses but not sterilized. The doctor, Johann Baptist Almüller, had no tools of his own and few answers to offer. All 6 victims had been killed with a blunt force object, likely a mattock. The wounds were severe, mostly to the head. Most died instantly, except for young Cecilia. She had bruises on her face and neck, hair clutched in her fists. She had lived for hours, possibly an entire night, after her injury, slowly suffocating in the straw beside her mother's body. It was the smallest, most tragic detail in the entire case. Maria, the maid, had been killed in her room. The blow crushed her skull completely. Her arms were folded over her chest, possibly post-mortem. Joseph, the baby, had been smothered and hid. His bassinet remained undisturbed. Police found no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked, the windows intact. Money and valuables were left untouched. The killer had entered and exited without breaking in, likely using a key, possibly the one that had gone missing weeks earlier. But it wasn't just what was missing that made things confusing. It was what had been left behind. Food had been eaten, fresh bread sliced, meat missing from the pantry, plates in the sink. The dog was fed, barking when strangers arrived, alert but not starving. Multiple villagers would later swear that over the weekend they heard movement inside the house, footsteps, the clinking of glass, a door closing, but no voices. Each day the curtains were drawn open in the morning and closed again at night. Someone was keeping up appearances. One neighbor even claimed they saw smoke coming from the chimney long after the murders. The implication was clear. The killer didn't just kill, they stayed for hours, maybe days, sleeping, eating, living inside the house, among the dead. The town was small. Everyone knew each other. Everyone had theories. As the police began their investigation, they focused on people the family already knew. The first name that came up was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the Gruber's neighbor. He was the first person to enter the home and discover the bodies. He was also rumored to be Joseph's real father. At one point, Lorenz had wanted to marry Victoria, but Andreas refused. There were court records that showed Lorenz had once paid child support, and then abruptly stopped. When asked how he entered the house so confidently, Lorenz said, "The door was locked, so I used my own key." That raised eyebrows. Why did he still have a key? Lorenz claimed he must have kept one from a previous visit months ago. But that didn't match what others in the village remembered. He was interrogated multiple times. Each time, his story shifted slightly. He was never arrested. But for the rest of his life, people whispered that he knew more than he said. The next theory focused on 2 brothers, known only as the Gumps. They had criminal records. One of them had once threatened Andreas during a land dispute, but both had alibis. One was in jail. The other was confirmed to be hundreds of miles away. Still, rumors swirled. A local boy claimed he saw 2 men watching the barn from the woods. No one else could confirm this. And then there was the most mysterious theory of all. It involved Victoria's husband, Carl Gabriel. Officially, Carl had died in World War I, but his body was never recovered, and over the years, multiple German soldiers came forward claiming they'd seen a man who matched Carl's description, alive, living under a different name in Austria. One even claimed Carl had admitted to returning home and discovering Victoria had borne a child with another man. Could he have come back, disfigured from the war, unrecognizable and furious? Could he have been the one hiding in the attic? Listening, waiting, there was no proof, just speculation, and a name that would never appear on a death certificate. The deeper police looked, the stranger things became. They found a small crawl space in the attic with hay scattered across it, as if someone had been sleeping there. The barn loft had fresh prints, but the snow had melted, making it impossible to identify them. No fingerprints were collected. No murder weapon was found. Years later, a rusted mattock, the presumed murder weapon, was discovered buried in a nearby shed. But by then, it was too late to test, too late to matter. By the summer of 1922, police had no answers. In 1923, the house was demolished. Nothing was ever rebuilt there. And as the years passed, the Hinterkaifeck case became one of Europe's most haunting unsolved mysteries. 6 people murdered, no arrests, no confessions, no conclusions, only silence and shadows. When the murders at Hinterkaifeck became public, Germany froze. It wasn't just the brutality. It was the way it happened. Slow, deliberate, quiet, no motive, no arrest, no escape. And most terrifying of all, it wasn't the kind of story you could forget. The nearby towns of Grubern and Kaifeck were the first to respond. Shocked, then suspicious. People who once helped each other with firewood now locked their doors, looked over their shoulders. The village split into 2 kinds of people: those convinced the killer was a stranger, and those who believed he had never left. Rumors spread fast. Some said a madman had come from the woods. Others whispered that the killer was someone the Grubers knew. A few even believed the family had been cursed. The cemetery filled to capacity the day the family was buried, but they weren't whole. Before burial, the heads of all 6 victims were removed, sent to Munich for forensic analysis. They were never returned. To this day, the bodies rest in marked graves without skulls. And still, the stories didn't stop. Visitors to the ruins of Hinterkaifeck claimed to hear things. Footsteps in the attic, a child crying softly in the barn, a woman singing, though no one was there. One hunter said his dog refused to approach the property, growling and whimpering until they turned back. Some farmers swore they saw lights glowing in the upper windows of the house, even after it had been destroyed. Eventually, locals gave the site a nickname: the house that ate its family. Children were warned not to walk near the forest paths behind it. Travelers passing by after dark claimed the trees felt off, too quiet, too still. And no matter how many years passed, the suspicion never really faded. The case was reopened multiple times. No new evidence, no arrest, but plenty of theories. Here are the ones that history refuses to forget. The first, the lover's revenge. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor, the man who may have been Joseph's father, the first to find the bodies. Some believed he was bitter, that Victoria rejected him, that Andrea stood in his way, and that Lorenz, humiliated and furious, snapped, that he waited until the perfect moment, the arrival of the new maid, knowing the entire household would be together. Then he carried it out, calculated, cold. He knew the property. He had a key. He was the first on the scene and the only one who seemed unshaken. But there's no proof, only questions, and a man who, until the day he died, denied everything. The second theory: Carl Gabriel returned, Victoria's husband, officially killed in the war. But no body was ever recovered. In the years that followed, several German POWs claimed to have seen a man who looked like Carl, living under another name in Austria. One even claimed Carl confessed to returning home and discovering Victoria had a child by another man. Was the shame too much? Did he snap? Or was it all just rumor? No one claiming to be Carl ever came forward. No record surfaced. And time moved on. The third theory: the farm hand, a former worker, a drifter, someone who knew the routines, the barn, the attic crawl space, someone with a grudge, or perhaps someone unwell. Several former employees were interviewed. One disappeared shortly after the murders. His identity was never confirmed. The final theory, and the darkest: a ritual killing. Years later, letters surfaced in police files suggesting the bodies were arranged deliberately. The killer took time, stacked the victims, covered them with hay. No money was taken, no valuables stolen, only lives and peace. Some believed it was symbolic. Others believed it was the work of a cult. But there were no markings, no writings, nothing left behind to say why. By the 1950s, Hinterkaifeck had become legend. Books were written, folklore passed down. The story spread like an old ghost tale. But unlike fiction, this was true. Every word, every silence. In the 1970s, and again in the early 2000s, detectives revisited the case. They tried new profiling tools, interviewed remaining relatives, reviewed dusty files. Still, no answers. Some records have been lost, others sealed. The official stance? The case remains unsolved. The killer likely lived nearby and may have returned to everyday life unnoticed. Today, the house is gone, but the field remains, and so does the story. 6 people murdered. No closure, no justice, only mystery. And for those who still whisper about it, only one name matters: Hinterkaifeck. Some stories end with a name, a killer caught, a motive revealed, a sentence passed. But this story never got that. Hinterkaifeck gave us only silence and a house that watched and waited. What makes it so haunting isn't just how the family died, it's how they lived, isolated, surrounded by suspicion, slowly unraveling beneath the surface of routine. The footsteps, the keys, the attic. The Grubers were never truly alone, not even in their last days. For over a century, the mystery of Hinterkaifeck has remained one of Europe's most unsettling unsolved crimes. 5. In the stories still whispered at night, and Hinterkaifeck wasn't the only one. There were others, other homes, other nights where silence turned deadly. Let's look quietly at 3 real cases that carry eerie similarities. Case 1, the Villisca Axe Murders, Iowa, 1912. 8 people were found dead, a family, 2 overnight guests, each struck in their sleep with an axe. No forced entry. The killer hid in the attic, waited until night fell, and disappeared without a trace. No arrests, no motive, and more than a century later, still no answers. Case 2, the Keddy Cabin Murders, California, 1981. A remote cabin, a mother, her children, 2 guests, murdered brutally with knives and a hammer. 1 child went missing. Her remains were found years later. Despite evidence, the investigation was botched. The suspects were known. Still, no one was charged. Case 3, the Copycat, France, 2017. A rural family, bludgeoned, stacked in a barn. Some claimed it mirrored Hinterkaifeck, the arrangement, the calmness, the way the killer lingered, but investigators found no connection, only coincidence, or maybe a reminder that some horrors repeat, not because they're copied, but because evil doesn't need instructions. It finds its way. And maybe that's why stories like this stay with us, because they remind us how quickly the familiar can vanish. A warm home, a locked door, a daily routine, and then silence. The killer at Hinterkaifeck didn't run. They didn't rush. They stayed, fed the animals, ate the food, slept in the beds, and when they were done, they left nothing behind but questions and cold. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying, for listening, for wondering. You've now heard what happened, what was found, and what never made sense. If this story moved you, confused you, haunted you, you're not alone. Leave a thought, share a theory, or simply remember the name, Hinterkaifeck, because stories like these don't end, they echo. And somewhere in the woods beyond the fields, someone still walks without leaving footprints.